15 years later, the cinema is taking its first steps. Cameramen employed by the Lumiere brothers filming at Jerusalem Station provide the first moving pictures taken in Palestine. From now on, the camera is a recording eye, and what it records is this: a society much like that of Cairo, Damascus, or Beirut, in an Arab city much like any other. By the end of the 19th century, Palestine has 500,000 inhabitants, of whom 30,000 live in Jerusalem. A veiled woman, a Sunni Muslim, one of the majority. An Orthodox Jew. He too turns away from the camera. Here we have an Armenian Pope. Each of the Christian denominations has its church here in the Holy City. The Holy has its church here in the Holy City. The holy places of the three religions are scattered across a few hundred square meters. The Great Mosque is close to Christ's tomb. Further along, at the foot of the Wailing Wall, a Jew is reciting a prayer. He is wearing a Turkish tabush, and though he prays in Hebrew, his everyday language is Arabic. Jews form half the population of Jerusalem, but in the country as a whole they make up less than 5% of the total. Christians account for 10% and Muslims 85%. All of them are subjects of the Sultan of Constantinople. There are no frontiers in the...
After a bomb explosion caused by terrorists on the British headquarters at Jerusalem, one entire corner of the King David Hotel, a building of 7 stories, was razed to the ground. The stone floors were cut clean.
In scenes eerily reminiscent of New York 55 years later, the Jerusalem bomb was the beginning of terrorism as a media event, designed to capture the world's attention.
The latest casualty list included 65 killed, 47 injured.
The perpetrators, Zionist Jews, members of Menachem Begin's Irgun terrorist network. Begin, who would one day become Prime Minister of Israel, described this tactic as turning Palestine into a glass house, where the entire world was looking in.
New savagery flares up in Palestine as terror gangs strike again, this time at the Goldsmith Officers Club in Jerusalem. Covered by small arms fire, the terrorists hurled suitcases full of explosives through the windows of the club, which immediately blew up. Rescue workers were on the spot almost at once, but 19 lives were lost and 26 soldiers and civilians were injured in one of the most cowardly outrages yet borne by our troops. Martial law was immediately proclaimed in Jerusalem, Tel Aviv and other heavily populated areas in which the underground army had its secret hideouts. Strict curfew kept 250,000 in their homes, while everywhere our troops were on patrol, sealing off suspected areas and combing out every street and every house as the big roundup went on. So our forces carry on their long-repeated routine, while the murder gangs continue their open defiance, with deeds which have now become a challenge not only to Britain herself, but to the supreme authority of the United Nations.
In the great synagogue at Tel Aviv, stolen uniforms of many British regiments and bales of forged bearer bonds of the Palestine government have been discovered, in addition to a portable radio transmitter and quantities of illegal weapons and explosives. All this came to light when a false wall in the synagogue was found. The Jewish temple keeper was placed under arrest. 200,000 Jews are being checked by 2 divisions of British troops and Palestine police. 25,000 people are being interrogated each day. Our troops, in sternly guarded surroundings, are looking for members of the notorious Irgun Sfaili Umeh and the Stern Gang, suspected of blowing up the King David Hotel in Jerusalem.
Zionism is a political and national movement aimed at creating and sustaining a Jewish state in the Middle East. Now, according to many traditional and Orthodox Jewish teachings, Jews are forbidden by God to have their own state until their Messiah comes. But this hasn't stopped Zionism from pushing towards that very goal. So where did this all start? Let's go back to 1897. A man named Theodor Herzl formed the World Zionist Organization. He advocated for the creation of a Jewish state in Palestine, and is even mentioned in the Israeli Declaration of Independence. It was tough to be a Jew in Europe in that time, with anti-Semitic sentiments rising. Herzl felt the only way for his people to live in peace was for them to have their own country. Palestine was chosen, and a popular slogan started spreading around the world. A land without a people, for a people without a land. The only problem was, Palestine wasn't a land without a people, for a people without a land. The only problem was, Palestine wasn't a land without a people. A large number of Muslims and Christians, along with a smaller number of Jews, had been living there together in peace for centuries. But for many Christian Zionists living in the West and Jewish Zionists living in Europe, that made little difference. Following the fall of the Ottoman Empire at the end of World War I, and along with British support, Jewish immigration to the newly British-occupied Palestine was steady in the early 20th century. Then there was a turning point, World War II. Following the Holocaust, the flow of Jews to occupied Palestine boomed, and many Western countries began backing the idea of a Jewish state in Palestine. Although a UN resolution recommended both an independent Arab and Jewish state in the region, Israel went ahead and declared their independence in 1948 and was recognized.
I also think that as a Jewish person, like, I was fed a huge amount of lies about Israel my entire life. You know, they never tell you that. Oh, by the way, there were people there. They make it seem like it was just like they're sitting there. It was the doors open.
Hours for the taking.
Like, it literally, they forget to include the fact to every young Jewish person, basically, like, oh, by the way, there were people there. It'd be nice to live somewhere that was not a part of the Christian apocalyptic prophecy. It is also probably a good idea. It's like, maybe settle somewhere that, you know, the Christians don't think you all have to die in order for the
and then they want us all to go there. They need a certain number.
They need us to go there so we can die. So the apocalypse.
But that, could you imagine living in Israel? Would you ever go live in Israel?
No.
Is actually to maintain an apartheid system. Very early on, I understood that the rights that the Jewish settlers have are not the rights that the Palestinians have. I understood that I cannot touch a Jewish settler if he is attacking a Palestinian. The best I can do is call a local police department to come handle it, like I would do at home in Jerusalem. So these Jewish settlers that live in Hebron are living under the same rights that I live in Jerusalem, but the Palestinian next to them, next house over, next building over, sometimes next apartment over, lives under my rule, my military rule. And I can do whatever I want with him. I can take his home as a temporary base for a few hours, to a few days, to a few weeks. I can decide that I'm arresting the people of the house and tying them up to the fence of my base. If we will get an order to demolish their home or just lock their front door and don't let them out into the street their house is on, as Jewish settlers can walk on, and Palestinians cannot. So they have to walk through windows to yards, into the other side, into the Kasbah of Hebron. I think realizing all of that in a very, very early stage in my service helped me understood that someone was lying to me along the way. I didn't feel like I'm protecting anyone. I didn't feel like I'm helping anyone feeling more safe. I feel like I'm terrorizing people. I feel like for the first time in my life, the boundaries between good and bad that I learned as a kid, and obviously I learned that I'm on the good side, was broken. I felt like I am the terrorist. And my job was literally to scare people so they cannot think about acting against the Israeli settlers or the Israeli military. That was actually our defined mission, to make sure that to instill fear in the hearts of Palestinians in Hebron. And that's exactly what we did.
The Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine is a part of the Palestinian Liberation Movement, and the Palestinian Liberation Movement aims to build a democratic Palestine where all sorts of discrimination, either they are economical or religious or national or social, are supposed to be cancelled. We believe that because of the nature of contradiction between the Palestinian and the Arab National Liberation Movement and between the enemy, which is Israel and the World Zionist Movement and the world imperialism, because of the nature of this contradiction, there is only one way to solve it, and that is through the people's armed struggle. This long people's war is supposed to be the way the people impose their will against their enemies and build the society where everybody in it, regardless of its religion or national background or economical situation, will be equal. I want first to notice that among the most dangerous weapons of our enemy is the weapon of words. They call it peaceful solution when it is in fact the capitulation conditions. We are against it exactly because it's not a peaceful solution. We are against it exactly because it is another phase of forcing the Palestinian and the Arab people to kneel under the will of their enemies and by the force of the superior weapons and armies. To us, the peace is the justice.
Churchill writes about the future. The wealthy, crowded, progressive Jewish state will lie in the plains and on the seacoasts of Palestine. Around it and the hills and the uplands stretching far and wide into the illimitable deserts, the warlike Arabs of Syria, of Transjordania, Jordan, of Arabia, backed by the armed forces of Iraq, offer the ceaseless menace of war. To maintain itself, the Jewish state will be armed to the teeth and will bring in every able-bodied man to strengthen its army. But how long will this process be allowed to continue by the great Arab populations in Iraq and Palestine? Can it be expected that the Arabs will stand by impassively and watch the building up with Jewish capital and resources of a Jewish army equipped with the most deadly weapons of war until it was strong enough not to be afraid of them? 1937. And if, Churchill goes on, and if ever the Jewish army reaches that point, who can be sure that, cramped within their narrow limits, they will not plunge out into the new, undeveloped lands that lie around them? 67, written in 37. You don't read this kind of thing anymore.
Churchill, during the Peel Commission, which looked at the division of Palestine, rejected the Arab wish to stop Jewish migration to Palestine. This is what he said: "I do not admit that the dog in the manger has the final right to the manger, though they may have lain there for a very long time. I do not admit that right. I do not admit, for instance, that a great wrong has been done to the Red Indians of America or the black people of Australia. I do not admit that wrong has been done to those people by the fact that a stronger race, a higher grade race, or at any rate a more worldly wise race, to put it that way, has come in and taken their place. I do not admit it. I do not think the Red Indians had any right to say American continent belongs to us, and we are not going to have any of these European settlers come in. They had not the right, nor had they the power." Can you imagine calling or likening the Palestinians as dogs in a manger? Really shows you the dehumanizing and colonialist mindset of Britain at that time.
In 1969, Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir said, "Palestinians do not exist." Prime Minister Menachem Begin calls Palestinians two-legged beasts. Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir called them grasshoppers who could be crushed. Prime Minister Levi Eshkol said, What are Palestinians? When I came here to Palestine, there were 250,000 non-Jews, mainly Arabs and Bedouins. It was a desert, more than underdeveloped, nothing. In 1937, Winston Churchill said of the Palestinians, I quote, "I do not agree that the dog in a manger has the final right to the manger, even though he may have lain there for a very long time. I do not admit that right. I do not admit, for instance, that a great wrong has been done to the Red Indians of America or the black people of Australia. I do not admit that a wrong has been done to these people by the fact that a stronger race, a higher grade race, a more worldly wise race, to put it that way, has come in and taken their place. That set the trend for the Israeli state's attitude towards Palestinians. This is the language of heads of state, not the words of all."
And Israel has to escalate. Israel has to commit these massacres because Israel is faced with two choices with Gaza. Fix the problem, allow the refugees to return, rebuild, or kill. Now, the first option is not acceptable because we don't want the Arabs back. We just got rid of them. So that's out of the question. Doing nothing is impossible. You have to do something about this disaster. So what Israel found is you can kill them and call them and blame them for being terrorists, and the world applauds. I mean, it's incredible how Israel manages to massacre innocent civilians, and the world says it's self-defense. You know, it's a magic trick. I don't know how anybody can be so gullible, so stupid, to accept that this massacre of innocent, unarmed, harmless civilians can be called self-defense. Self-defense from what?